Hello, and welcome to day 10 of the Ability event. My name is Joseph Jones of the Harkin Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to the second installment of the US-China Deaf Project conversations. Today's conversation will be a session focused on deaf identity and culture in China. This second of a 5-week series that's going to happen on Wednesdays really highlights the collaborative research through people-to-people exchange that's being performed by Dr. Kathryn Johnson and Dr. Amy Knopf. They've also invited some of their colleagues from China to be a part of this very purposeful discussion and dialogue on disability policy in China. And so we're really excited that you could be here for today's program, and we hope that you'll be able to join us for the rest of this series, along with the programs and presentations that will happen every day as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I hope that you have a great day and enjoy our program.
Hi, welcome to our US-China meeting and conference tonight. On Wednesdays, we will have our research and share with you everything that we're doing on our project thus far between US-China schools for the deaf. Our project is with Kathy Johnson and me, Amy Knopf. Welcome. We're very thankful that you could be here with us tonight. Before we start, I wanted to let you know and have a conversation about how we will be communicating with the interpreters this evening. I have a voice interpreter for me right now, and we have 4 deaf panelists from China. Each one of them will have a voice interpreter. Also, we will have talking Chinese interpreters and Chinese Sign Language interpreters. So if it seems like we're signing slow, well, you know, it's because we have multiple tiers of interpreting all of the languages. So thank you everyone for being here. And so I'm going to proceed and explain myself. I'm a woman, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. Thank you, Amy. And also, I have gray hair. It's short. And I have beautiful purple glasses. And I have a jacket on, a black jacket. And now, I would like our panelists, please, to start their videos. And then we'll start the introductions. So could each of you please start your videos. Start your video.
Hello, everybody. I am thrilled to be here. My name is Shairong Zhou, and I am a female with brown hair, shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing a black shirt with an insignia on it and glasses.
Hello, everyone. I have a black shirt on. I have glasses on, and I'm a male. I'm from China. I was born in Taiwan, and I am here and happy to be with everybody. Thank you for having me.
Hang on, before we go, I just want to let the audience know that was Ji-Yuan from Taiyuan. So we'll be helping each other as the night goes on with pronouncing for interpreters, for captionists, and for the audience. So now let's go to Yukon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yukon, and I am from China. I was born and live from Shanghai, and I am a male. I have black glasses on, kind of square glasses, black shirt, and I have Chinese words on it, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you, and nice to meet you all.
Hello, my name is Gaxin Mai. I was born in Guangdong. And I've got black glasses and a black shirt with the sign language, the Chinese characters that say thank you.
Hold on, Amy. Sorry, I'm back on. Okay, go ahead. Thank you. It's really interesting, deaf culture and Chinese deaf culture. Could you talk about that and when you first, your experience? Could you talk a little bit about when you first realized you had a deaf identity in China? Xiaorang, 1 minute. Hold on. Wait. 1 minute. We need to change the interpreters. Okay.
So I was born hearing and had a very high temperature that caused me to lose my hearing and become deaf. I accepted that because I have a deaf sister and we were able to use sign language together. Even though the rest of my family would speak because they are not deaf, but we were able to get along okay. I went to a university in China, and the language that I was learning was similar to what we would learn in America, signing exact English. And I thought, no, I want to study Chinese sign language, true Chinese sign language. I had not yet found my identity, and they were trying to teach me the signs that went along with how the Chinese language is spoken.
Okay, we're going to give a minute for our Chinese interpreters to catch up. Thank you, Amy.
So I then went to graduate school in Korea, where everybody was signing in Korean Sign Language. We had access to sign language interpreters. We had interpreters in the hospital and in classrooms. And it was easy for me to be able to access language. I had a voice where I had no voice before. Before, I had always been very lonely and isolated and having to depend on writing. The people that I was going to school with were hearing, and I was impressed with them because many of them were learning to sign.
Thank you. It was really interesting how you were learning about your identity when you were in college. Is that right?
In Korea, in South Korea.
In Korea, when you were in college at that time, right? Doing your master's degree, right?
Right. Yeah, a long time ago.
How old were you at that time, do you think? How old were you?
36 years old.
Wow. Okay, thank you so
At
much.
the university when I was in school.
I will ask you more questions later, but hold for now. So next, let's go to Juyuan. Juyuan, your turn. When did you first notice your deaf identity and like growing up in China?
This is GU1. So I'm the only deaf one in my family. Everyone else is hearing. And everyone else spoke, and that's how we communicated.
Hold on. Hold on. When I was very young, then I had a shot after I had a temperature and I became deaf.
I was getting there. Yep, go ahead. And all of a sudden, my dad realized that I couldn't hear. So they took me to the hospital, and the doctor gave me some tests, saw if I could hear, and it turned out that I couldn't. So at the time we couldn't pay for hearing aids, but then I got hearing aids, and they sent me home. And I went to the deaf school and learned how to both speak and sign. And then I went to the high school.
We're waiting, pausing for our Chinese Sign Language interpreters. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. So after I transferred to the high school in Nanji, I could speak very well, and I wanted to. I was learning the vocabulary. I was exposed to the vocabulary and learned very well. And I was learning some art, some graphics, as well as the vocabulary, and I continued to learn. And after I graduated high school, I went to university.
Pause for interpreting in China. Clarification on what city that was in is happening in sign language right now. That's Nanjing. Nanjing, right? It was you were a deaf student? Was it a hearing school or a deaf school?
It was a deaf school.
Okay, just clarifying.
But it needed to be oral.
Oh, it was an oral school, an oral deaf school. Is that right?
No.
Or some sign language.
Nope, it was some signing. They had signing there and oral both.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. So where did you think that you got your deaf identity? In high school?
So I think when I really didn't realize it until I came to America, and then I decided that I wanted to be identified as deaf.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to take a turn with you, Kwan. Your turn. Can you tell me, please, your deaf identity? When did you first notice and feel yourself, wow, I'm deaf, I'm a deaf person?
I would say last year when I got here was July of 2020. So I think I finally identified as deaf. So before that, I didn't really know that I was deaf. I was with so many hearing kids that never signed.
I'm going to add in, starting in kindergarten, I realized I didn't know a lot of sign language and I didn't know a lot of deaf people. And so my early education was very different. Thank you, Jenna.
Yep.
And then you noticed when you came to the US and after you arrived here more.
Yes, and then I started to learn more sign language and socialize with more deaf kids here, or deaf people here.
Hold on 1 minute. Guangzhou, that is the deaf school that he went to when he was young, is in Guangzhou Deaf School. Is that right, Amy? Oh, no. Okay.
No, this is Qing, it's Qinjiao. Qinji. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but it's Qinghai.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Multiple languages going
Yes.
on.
And this sign is for Xining.
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 Okay.
Yes.
All righty. Thank you. Thank you, Jenna. We know this is challenging. Hold on one second.
So at the deaf school, when I started to sign, at the time there was no CSL, it was more CSEE, signing exact. And then I transferred it to the deaf school in
Nanjing.
And had a better education, and I studied more and learned, it was still C though, it wasn't CSL.
Yep, hold on one second. Part of the challenge there was that the teachers who were the teachers who were hearing were also still signing in Chinese exact sign language, not the natural Chinese sign language that the students used.
So after I graduated and went to the Deaf University
In Changchun.
Then I learned some more, and then when I got to the US is when I really identified more as deaf.
Now, I'm going to turn off my video, ask you all to turn off your video. No.
I'm going to quickly turn off mine so Mike can be moved to the top.
Okay.
So the interpreter can see him better.
Okay, thank you, Amy. There we go. So Jiqian, for your story, can you tell us your deaf identity? When did it start? When did you notice your own identity?
I noticed my deaf identity last year, coming to America and meeting so many deaf people and seeing that I was like them. They were teachers like I am a teacher. We identified the same. I had a connection immediately. My family is all hearing. I am the only deaf person in my family. At 4 months pregnant, my mother contracted an illness and took some medicine that caused my deafness. I didn't know how to identify. I didn't identify as anything. I would meet hearing people. I had friends that were hearing, but they were friends like me, but they spoke. And I thought, well, I can speak. And I would try to speak, and I didn't make any sense. And people would kind of shy away from me a bit. And it made me wonder, am I deaf? It took me a while to understand that. In middle school, I studied for 6 years. I was in an all-hearing school. I was the only deaf person there. Everybody in my school was hearing. Communication was very difficult. We gestured. We did writing back and forth. But again, I didn't necessarily have an identity, deaf or hearing.
1 minute, Chinese Sign Language interpreters are catching up. Thank you.
So going into middle school, I did go into a deaf school. And walking into that deaf school, into a classroom where everybody was deaf and using sign language, I didn't know sign language. And they would look at me and they would say, I'm deaf. And I would think, well, I am deaf too. So culturally, we shared the language. We had that in common. We shared Chinese Sign Language, and little by little, that identity, I began to recognize that I identified as deaf, and that my identity as what I thought maybe a hearing person kind of went to the wayside. In high school, I went to a school for the deaf, and I was taught very well. I was able to socialize, the education was good, the teachers taught me, I learned a lot. I had good education, but my sign language still was not quite there. I was still learning. When I went to the university, I went to the university in Zhengzhou. So at Zhengzhou, normal university, I received my BA. Had many friends who were deaf and Chinese and people from all over. And Chinese Sign Language, along with international gesturing that was happening, I was learning all of that based at the same time. And that then increased my knowledge and my awareness and my identity as a deaf person due to my language and my deaf culture that was ingrained in me as well as those that I was around. And I realized I was not able to speak, but I am able to sign. And so if I met a hearing person, I would write back and forth. And sometimes that could be difficult, but gesturing oftentimes seals the deal and makes it work.
1 minute, Amy. Let our Chinese interpreters catch up. 1 minute. Okay. So you feel at the start of development of your identity, it started like in about high school, do you think? Or college? And
So,
you know?
I think at university, I think that's really where I really started to identify as a deaf person. And now coming to America, my identity has just been even more so solidified.
Okay. So in Zhengzhou, you use CSL sign language, is that right?
Oh, it varied. We use some of the Chinese exact. People coming from the north and the south were gesturing because they were using a different sign language. Basically, the sign language was the same. But culturally, historically, the words that were used, depending on where people were from, could be very different. And so we all kind of learned to code switch to be able to communicate. So people coming from Beijing, maybe I hadn't learned their signs, they hadn't learned my signs. Coming from the south, I'm sorry, Kathy, what is that sign?
Guangzhou.
In Guangzhou.
Guangzhou.
In Guangzhou, compared to Beijing, where people sign, then we would learn one another's words and then be able to learn from each other. So the sign language is really varied from place to place, depending on where you were from and where you were coming from.
Okay, hold, Amy. Let's let them catch up in China. Hold, waiting for the CSL interpreter right now, so we'll hold 1 minute. Thank you all. Okay, all right, Amy, you're back. Okay. So I'm really curious about which of you didn't develop or notice until later in your life.
I'm sorry, can I sign and speak for myself?
Yes, I'm trying to read the questions at the same time. Please do, Amy.
I'm not following my script, so I'm throwing off the interpreter. Sorry, we're trying, it's not working out for me. Each of you have talked about finding your identity later in life. And some of you talked about your identity you found here in America. I'm curious if you, what does deaf community look like in China? Do you have deaf clubs? Do you have deaf adults that you interact with? Or what does it look like for you? And I'll start with GUN because I know you're from Chengchun, which is more northern China. So I'm kind of interested your perspective about deaf community or deaf club, or how exposed to other deaf adults.
So are you talking about here? So here well, in China, we really didn't have anything.
In China, were you around any deaf adults? Deaf clubs, deaf activities?
No?
Before I studied my master's degree, one second. Can you back up again?
Oh, you're talking about deaf organizations?
Mm-hmm.
Deaf agencies, maybe? So I would say maybe when I was about 16, 17, I wasn't involved in anything. I didn't know. Some people had come and asked me to come and do some things. Like games. I'm not sure if it's that soccer maybe. And then when I was going to get my master's, I kind of I was so involved in my studying that I didn't really get involved in much.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm wondering for UConn, you also said your identity developed here in America last year in November when you arrived. So what community, deaf people in the community you were exposed to or around in your hometown?
So being in America, there's so many different kinds of deaf people, so many different people, and learned ASL, and ASL being so expressive. And at my home, can someone help me with that?
Yep, and at Chongchun University.
Thank you. And at Changchun University, there was some people that did CSL, but most of them did the signing the exact. So what I'm hoping to do is bring more of the CSL back to China, and so people can be more expressive and not do the exact Chinese. So I would like to see more expressive and the more CSL back home.
Yes, and especially at Chongchun University, I hope that there are more people that will be using more Chinese Sign Language, natural Chinese Sign Language, so that we can all communicate together.
I think that the natural Chinese Sign Language is important, and having one language, especially for deaf, blind. I know that in America they have that. I don't see that in China. America, they have deaf, blind that know American Sign Language. So I would like to see that happen in China as well, that deaf and blind have the same language, and that they have a way to be taught. And so I'd like to take all of that back and develop that and set that up at the university. So I look forward to developing and hopefully some kind of curriculum there. Thank you.
When did you learn CSL? Did you learn CSL in college?
No, not until I came here to America. And I changed over and learned CSL here
Okay.
from Sharon.
Yep. And also I had my mentor of Xiaorong was here, who really taught me a deep understanding of Chinese Sign Language.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, yes, Xiaorong helped me understand. Thank you.
He's explaining what you said. Thank you. I have more questions, but I'm going to hold and now go to Mike so that you can tell us when did you start learning CSL, and did you have exposure to deaf community adults? When was that?
I was in middle school. That's when I began learning Chinese Sign Language. No, high school. In high school, they were still using the exact Chinese, signing exact Chinese characters with a lot of gesturing and not much facial expression at all. Very, very flat-faced. When I went into the university at
Zhangzhou.
Zhangzhou Normal University.
Zhangzhou, right.
At Zhangzhou University. On the weekends, deaf friends, there were 4 of us, we would go out to a place, socialize, and we would talk. There were a lot of older deaf people there, and I saw that they were so expressive, so much of it went so far over my head, but I was able to pick up one from one older deaf Chinese person who was 70. I met, and we would kind of sign and gesture to one another, and I would ask him to slow down, and little by little I started to pick that up. And then I learned from a Chinese Sign Language book. There was an old book where maybe the signs and the words, they were different, but finger spelling too. Older deaf Chinese people do not finger spell. That was very eye-opening to me. It's all written, or it's all signed in gestures. And again, because I had been so assimilated to the signing Chinese characters, being able to meet these people really broadened my world, and I was able to learn little by little. That happened on weekends. We would go, the 4 of us would go, and that's where I really started to develop my Chinese Sign Language skills. In terms of when I made the change, as being a younger person, working with older deaf people, and then meeting people in their 40s and their 50s, 60s, and so on. As a young deaf person, I would try to assimilate into what they were saying and mimicking or echoing how they were signing it. And then when I came to America with American Sign Language, there are so many people. And so again, weekends, we've been able to go out and just socialize. And I've been able to see all of the facial grammar and facial expression and how important that is to the language, the restructuring of language and how things are said. The same thing happened when it was happening with the older deaf Chinese that I was meeting. And for me, I was going in very exact Chinese word order or character order. And so it really then began to help me to learn and expand my language. At the university, I think my 3rd year, I went to Beijing, and and I saw.
Holding for a moment to let the Chinese voice and sign language interpreters catch up. So hold that thought, Mike, hold it. Okay, yes, response from our Chinese Sign Language interpreters. We're going a little bit fast. So we need to slow down. Everybody's so excited. Okay.
Do you want me to say that again?
No, start from when you went to Beijing. Okay.
So, right, so went to Beijing, and there were 16 deaf people. And again, I was a little nervous because of the way that I was signing, but socializing with them. We actually had a teacher from Austria come and talk with us about language, and I was able to see that I was already learning so much, but then they making changes and really watching somebody be able to go from signing exact Chinese to Chinese Sign Language, the difference between the words and the visual gestural language of Chinese Sign Language.
Excellent. Hold on. I'm on WeChat with our Chinese Sign Language interpreters, so I'm getting some feedback. We will pause and reflect on that. Okay.
Yeah, so people coming from the north and the south was very different. And people who were using, I was learning words and signs from all over the country that then allowed me to, when I met a deaf person, and where are you from, I could ask them. I could be able to change to be able to communicate with them. That was number one for me. Gesturing was number two, so signing and gesturing. But none of this, no facial grammar, signing exact Chinese.
Okay, 1 minute. Thank you. Amy is saying thank you. Amy, are you going to voice for yourself?
It's up to you.
Go ahead.
Okay, now we're going to go to Shirong. And I'm interested in yours because you grew up with a deaf sister. So your experience is a little bit different than the three interns that we have here. So can you share about your exposure to deaf community, deaf adults, deaf activities?
1 minute. Let's get the CSL interpreters caught up with your question. And go.
I think when I was 3, my deaf sister was the only one, she was by herself, and then I came along and I learned everything so quickly. We learned so quickly from each other. And people would say, "They're so smart." And I would wonder why they thought that. And then on weekends and holidays, we would go and meet deaf people. Saturdays and Sundays, we would go to the park. We would go to the park and to Chinese celebrations and festivals and movies, and people would talk and I would watch. And then when we would travel, we were able to talk and I was able to pick things up. It was very normal for me.
1 minute. She's in the middle of her thought, but we're letting Chinese Sign Language. Thank you.
And it wasn't that I was being formally taught. I was just learning through exposure and seeing all of this. Same thing at the school, at the deaf school. There were 400 or 500 deaf kids, and so we were just all there with each other.
Wow.
Using Chinese Sign Language.
Wow. Well, I know when I lived in China, in Chongqing, I was able to visit several senior citizen groups. And it was so interesting to me because it seemed like they had a strong deaf community. And so I'm wondering maybe if in China it's different, maybe older groups get together and it takes a little bit longer for the younger group to find each other. I'm not sure, but the other thing that I was thinking of in China, wow, you guys have a network with WeChat. So you probably interact a lot with people on WeChat, other deaf folks through activities or events. Do you do that through WeChat or through technology? Reach out in a community way?
Kathy Johnson is saying hold. Hold for the Chinese. Thank you. It's going much smoother this week than last week. We like our interpreters to breathe. Thank you, everyone. Pausing. Okay.
So, Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious about deaf community, because many of you said you found later, but I was just curious if you were involved with deaf community through WeChat or through online kinds of networks in China, or is that different?
Well, I think it's different than it was in the past, because before there was no internet and it was very easy to get together. It was easy to write letters. You had to use, I mean, we had to use the phone, but today is very different. Socializing is very different. Everybody's doing more one-on-one through video chat. It's different. I like the old way better. The old way, I like that. Yeah, not so much technology.
So all of you, the four of you, have been here in the US since November of last year. And so I'm so sorry that part of this experience you've been quarantined because of COVID-19. But I'm wondering, what experiences have you had here that you feel have shaped your identity as a deaf person?
Are you asking? Who are you asking?
Shirong?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I missed it. Can you please repeat?
I'm curious, since you've come to the United States, about your experience here. Like, how do you feel, and what have you done to help shape your identity? What kind of things did you experience here that really impacted you in your experiences? Thanks.
Yeah, in Minnesota, at the school for the deaf in Minnesota, all of the teachers there are deaf, all of them. That's amazing. I've never seen anything like that before. At a school for the deaf, that is just awesome. Math teachers are deaf, history, the gym teachers, they're deaf. So again, exposure for the children.
So your schools growing up had no deaf teachers? You did not have deaf teachers in your schools?
No, well, I think maybe one or two, maybe three in my entire childhood growing up. Now, many of them are quotas, but still hearing.
Okay. That's very interesting. And any other experiences?
I do. At Deaf Plus, I didn't know anything about this. It wasn't, you know, with deaf kids, with people who have deafness and something else, whether it's deafness and mental health, deafness and Usher syndrome, deafness and you know, missing a limb, whatever the case may be. There was a lot of support there, and deaf teachers, and then paraprofessionals as well. They had paraprofessional teachers who would work one-on-one, and those kids get support. In China, we have nothing like that. We have a teacher who basically lectures, and then but here in America they have, you know, they have aid to psychological support. They have paraprofessionals who do one-on-one support with them in the classroom. I mean, I want to learn as much as I possibly can. I've learned so much about deaf rights and what people should be learning and knowing.
Now I'm gonna go to Jiwen to share what have you learned, or what do you feel has really had an impact on you since you've come to the America since November? What experiences have impacted your identity?
One second, we need to unmute the CSL voice interpreter pair in China. So 1 second.
And then I have one thing to add too, if you don't mind.
Okay. Holding. Okay, hold on. Amy Knopf, will you interpret please for me? Amy Kalmas, what did you want to add? What did we miss?
Sharon has something to add.
Okay.
Yeah, at the School for the Deaf
In Delaware.
in Delaware, thank you. Kids who are in high school there with families who are deaf, mothers who are deaf, you know, parents who are deaf, and then Deaf Plus. I had to ask, what does that mean? And they said, oh, it means there's something else. I was so curious about what this meant because it was deafness plus something else going on. And so
It was autism, a student with autism she's talking about.
okay, thank you. I thought, what is happening with this deaf child who is someone in the corner talking to them, you know, kind of off to themselves and talking to themselves very quietly. And the mother said, no, 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 come on, sign. And the child was very stubborn about this. And every day they're working with language exposure in terms of food and juice, and the mother started to cry when she saw that, you know, this child was able to communicate, because sign language is such an important part, and so important to get kids who are deaf plus, deaf with other disabilities, language, because without language you can't do anything. You need that exposure and that language.
Okay,
Thank
hold on.
you.
Before we go to, it's a little fast again. So let's let them catch up. Thank you, Kai and David, our interpreters. Thank you, G-Lin Education Department, for hosting the Ding Talk. Appreciate all of your collaboration and work. Okay, GUN, Amy, do you want to ask the question again?
Jiwen, what experiences have you had here in the US since you've arrived that you feel have made an impact on your identity that help you grow as a person?
Hold on, letting the Chinese Sign Language interpreters again.
So at the School for the Deaf in Delaware, when I first went in there and observed the classrooms and the ASL classes there, and the signing, and there was no, like, nobody was telling them that they had to be oral or they had to sign or they had to do one way or another. Everyone was signing, and it was great. They were playing. They were learning new vocabulary, and then they were doing, you know, like they would review some words and then go back to playing. And again, I went in and observed again, like math class, vocab, English, different subjects. And it was just really neat to see all of that with everyone signing. And then at the end, I went to church. It was like a deaf celebration. And there's many different kinds of people there. I'm not sure if I'm getting this.
Hold on. And they were doing art and craft work together, designing shirts and doing work together and collaborating and working together as a community.
Okay. So it was hearing and deaf people together. And there are several deaf people all together, and they were supporting each other and making things together. And I thought that was really interesting. And there wasn't any, there wasn't anybody just, you know, like ignoring anybody, which I thought was interesting. So I took that to heart. So I think it's very important that everyone supports each other.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So now we'll go next to Yuquan. So what have you learned about your deaf identity since you've arrived here in the US?
Let's see. So I would say January, when I first went to the deaf school, I went around and observed lots of different classes, both hearing and deaf teachers, and how they taught their curriculums and how they taught different students. And I saw how important, there's one thing that really stuck with me, and how important it was. There was one specific deaf student that they were working with. There wasn't any like direct teaching. Like if somebody didn't understand, they worked very hard to continue to teach that person. They didn't just give up. So, and they worked with them one-on-one at the best time for that person to learn. I think the other thing that I really liked was how they use technology in the classroom, especially related to deaf and blind students, how they taught them. I thought that was very interesting. And how they can learn using technology, using the Visio book. The certain student couldn't see far away, but with the Visio book, they could still learn and see the teacher. It kind of like magnifies what they're learning. So that's specifically for deaf blind students. So it wasn't anybody that was just being left out at all. So I think the use of technology for including all students was great. So I'd like to use that in China more and more. And I'd like to teach other teachers how to use that and be inclusive. There's lots of things I could talk about that I think would help the teachers in China become better teachers.
Excellent. Okay, hold on. We'll let our others catch up with us in China. Each week we're going to get, every week we will become better and better with the interpreters in China. Okay, thank you. Amy, did you have another question? Jixian. Jixian, your identity since you've arrived here, how has it developed? And what is your hope for happening for all of China? What do you hope to bring back to China with you?
Okay, sorry, I was muted. The interpreter was muted.
Can you go back and start again? Okay, he's going to go back and start again.
At the schools for the deaf in China, deaf-blind students, we don't see any of them. Here in America, the schools have them at MSAD and also at the other school here. I've seen 4. And like I said before, the way in which classrooms are set up, to have the teacher stand or to have me stand where the person is able to, people are able to see, and then having the deaf-blind student start teaching with that. But ensuring that they're wearing something black, that they're able to be seen, that the lighting is appropriate. And learning too, learning sometimes takes longer than it may with other students, but it can happen, and it does happen. And at the school for the deaf that I attended in kindergarten, no, sorry, hang on, the interpreter needs clarification. At which school? I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, at NSAD.
Okay. Yep.
So at NSAD, the kindergarten teacher taught me how to work with deafblind, how to teach deafblind, how to develop PowerPoints with backgrounds that white doesn't work because it's too bright, that the background needs to be changed to a dark blue. Deaf students are able to see it just fine, but kids with vision impairments, same thing with text. Text needs to be made larger so that they're able to see. I learned a lot, and I've learned a lot since I've been here. And then when COVID-19 hit and we started working on Zoom, I was actually giving a lecture, and we had students, a deafblind student, who was being taught, and when we got to the deafblind student, I realized I needed to slow down. I needed to make sure that I was able to be seen. I had learned that from my experience, and so I was able to take that and bring it back to my teaching and include that now in my teaching methodology and how I teach, depending on who the student is. So in March, last March, I flew to Washington, D.C. and met a friend there named Jason, who is a deafblind individual. And it wasn't, we had to stand very closely because we had to utilize tactile sign language, me signing in his hand. So when I go home, I thought, ASL and CSL are not the same. However, working with a deafblind person standing behind, so to tell somebody, say yes, you can actually rub their back in the handshake with yes or no, or if somebody is angry, you can scratch their back, giving them the cue that somebody's angry. I have learned so much in terms of working with deafblind and what to do. So with American Sign Language, or ProTactile, I had never had that before, working with an interpreter behind, seeing an interpreter stand behind the person. And that interpreter is responsible for letting emotions and what's going on in the audience, And if that person, if the deafblind person is unable to speak, a hearing interpreter, they have a hearing interpreter who was able to interpret into spoken language. So I think that we can take this home and do the same thing in China, because ASL and CSL are similar enough to where we should be able to do that as they do here.
Wow, you've all had an amazing experience since you've arrived here in America, and I've seen your ASL just thrive. So it's been wonderful. I know we have lots of questions in the chat, but we don't have time to answer the questions. But come back next week, because we will be talking about what's happening in higher education at the university. And one of the things we'll be talking about also during our week that we are talking about K through 12 is deafblind. And so I know there were questions about deafblind. We'll get to your questions in the next few weeks. But for now, I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for all being here. This has been a wonderful dialogue, and 1 hour is just not enough. I could talk with all of you all night long. So, but what a wonderful experience.
Yes. And I would like to add also for the Chinese participants on the Ding Talk in China next week, please make sure that you have both the Zoom and the Ding Talk together up and on, because I know some of you have said you're frustrated because you can't see the presenters. So the only way right now to see the presenters is to join both meetings. So we will continue to send both the Zoom and the Ding Talk information for next week. Actually, it's the same link for both next week. So please talk together and help each other understand how to set it up on your computer and have the opportunity to see the presenters and see the Chinese Sign Language interpreters together, either on one screen or on 2 computers together, okay? So thank you to our group here.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to the group. Thank you to our captionists, and thank you to our interpreters. We have many interpreters tonight working. And I also would like to thank the attendees that are here and let you know that we will read your questions and we will try to incorporate the answers in our next few sessions. So thank you all. Have a good night.
To our team here, yay. Thank you. And please notice their t-shirts say thank you or thankful. That's the theme of our SCSU Confucius Institute. We're very thankful for this opportunity. Jilin Province Education Department and Voice of Hand for sharing the interpreters. Thank you to everyone. Okay, bye-bye everybody. Thank you.